So welcome again, everyone. This is our discussion for Martin Eden. Um, and we have our guest speaker, Gerald McCarthy, here. I'm Juliana Roth. I work here at Rivertown Film Society. If you don't know who we are the sole film nonprofit here in Rockland County. And this is our last screening of a film this year. We're going to be revisiting our Rockland in Motion short film series by Rockland filmmakers at the end of the month. And we also still have up until the 3rd City Hall and Harry Chapin When in Doubt Do Something. So if you haven't given those a watch, I recommend that as well. But tonight we're going to be talking about Martin Eden. And we're really lucky to have Gerald McCarthy here with us. He is a 2-time visiting artist at the American Academy in Rome and a professor of English at St. Thomas Aquinas College, where he programmed an Italian film series. So he knows a lot about Italian cinema, way more than I do. So I'm really excited to have him here, especially because we were just talking earlier and we found out that he worked for a Jack London scholar of all coincidences. So he has a particular expertise in Jack London. So I'm going to give the floor over to him right now. We're going to talk together for the next 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to you all to ask your questions. So I'd love to start talking about sort of the translation between text to screen. I know we were talking a lot about what the director changed and what you found interesting about the adaptation. So if you'd like to start, Gerald. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking today about what we thought were some things that were really, maybe we should talk about what were similar.
Yeah.
But because I think one of the central, Juliana and I were talking about one of the central things in the film is when he stands up at the dinner table and starts a tirade with the family of, in the film, I guess it's, in the novel it's Ruth, but in the film it's, I'm not sure what her name is now.
That's okay.
She is the daughter of the lawyer, and at that tirade, it really is it's the center of the film, in my opinion, because he says, "You're the socialists. I'm not a socialist," and I think that's really central to what London was doing in the novel. He's really writing his own story. He's writing an autobiographical novel, and it's probably one of the most developed characters of any of his books. Yeah. Really well developed, and really somebody he wanted to go let you see, I suppose, until you do see him. So that there's a lot of similarities in terms of what happens to the character once he gets success. So that's where I think we were talking about before, that success doesn't necessarily bring with it the things he thought it would. He's not happy with his audience either.
No, and I think you mentioned too that London wrote this book at a period in life where am I getting the timeline right, that he was really struggling himself financially?
Yeah, he made money on the books that we all know him for, a couple of the Yukons, but he was Yukon books about the gold rush, etc. And then he was on a cruise and needed more money, and he was in trouble, and the book didn't get critical acclaim. But it has staying power. That's what we were talking about before you joined us, that it was the only book of his that Macmillan kept in print for 70 years. He had 50 books. So this is the one they kept in print in hardcover. So it has staying power. Now there's somebody making a film about it. Quite a good film, I think, too, but seems like the story stays with us.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, at least the character of Martin Eden, who again we're saying is very similar to Jack London himself, of that loss of control of your audience and what it means as an artist to become a product or to seek financial gain from your work. I'm wondering what you know of London's life and the reception of this book. Like, how do you think he would be reacting to all of the material success attached to it?
Not so. I think that's an interesting question, but I think he would be pleased with this film. Mm-hmm. I think the film shows you what he's upset about, especially with the character of character of Russ, who some of the review, some of the editors of the biographies don't like that character, but I personally do like that character. I think he's an inspiration, and in the novel, he helps Martin Eden to assert himself with the socialists, even though he's not a socialist. He keeps saying, "I'm an individualist," but they claim. I think what we were saying earlier about some of the issues that people have today about economics and the poor are very much London's issue, what he cares about. He also did a really good book of, like Orwell. He went and did a book about the poor in England too. So he was somebody that was connected that way. So I don't know. I think in the film you don't see it, but it's the books that sold is really the essays. It's not, and that's what happens in the novel.
Yeah.
Book of essays that are political. And then he sells some of the other things, but he's been working a very long time, as you see in the film. He's really destitute, and they composite. They put that all together quite quickly with the family that he's staying with. That who brings them off the train. Mm-hmm. But he's been staying there a long time in the novel.
Yeah.
So
that moment where he's so frustrated of, this is the same writing I've been doing all along, and that shift of once you become that public persona and the popular opinion is in your favor, that it changes the reception of your work overall, and who he was really writing for, like you're saying, were the people who didn't have their voices heard at the time.
Right. But they didn't buy the book.
No.
I think that's what he's saying. When you see him, we were saying that earlier too, about when you see him slouched in the chair and he's got attitude. I think that's is done very well by the filmmaker, the director, because that is the essence of the novel. He's more alone than ever. That's what I was telling Matthew when Matthew asked me to talk. I said I was fascinated when I first started looking at literature and film as a poet and a writer about, I loved some of the attitudes that they had about the contemporary hero versus the romantic hero. And I really think he's a contemporary hero in that respect, because he doesn't change. He just gets to be more of himself. Alone at the end. Maybe all writers are really alone, and he's not crazy. He's really alone and he doesn't know what to do. And that's what he does. So in the novel and the book and the film are very alike that in terms of the ending, which some people didn't like at the time.
I'm curious if we could talk more about that ending and like what you were saying earlier too about the idea of caretaking in the movie. Yes. And how Martin Eden, he's trying so hard to take care of everybody around him, and sort of what that.
Do you think he did a good job of that in the film? Because I think they tried to show you quickly that everybody who helped him, he helped.
Well, I think one of the changes we talked about was like, I felt at the beginning of the film, we see him more of like, there is an immaturity to him, and like he sleeps with the waitress in the film, but not in the book, you were saying. And that scene with her, I didn't like him in it, where I'm like, oh, you're just forgetting about her now that you're getting what you think is class mobility. But knowing in the book that what he did for her solely was just help her with, go to school and get education, then that changes my perspective, because I think I saw him have a little bit of growth there, where he then went to that family and took care of them, versus the earlier Martin, where he, didn't really care fully about everybody. I thought he had a little change, but overall, it didn't seem as pronounced as like what you were saying.
Yeah, well, that's why it's good to read. I mean, I'm always fascinated with novels made into film, and so the more I read the novel, and I went back to passages because I was really interested in how towards its conclusion, I think you see that in the film, once Russ has killed himself, that's not going to have a happy ending. Yeah. I think you get that feeling. At least I did. It seemed to me like this is not going to end so well. Right? And so I think that's in the novel, though. He takes care of every single person who ever helped him. So you miss that because you're getting a very condensed version of events where he worked. He works in a laundry, so he helps the guy who worked in the laundry with him. And all of his other two sisters, both the one he was living with in the beginning and another sister whose husband doesn't want to talk to him. etc. And he helps everyone. So he helps that young woman in the film go to school, and so and there's no encounters with anyone. So that's kind of different too.
Yeah, that's an interesting change, and it made me rethink that moment a lot. And I know you mentioned a lot about his teeth, and that became like a symbol for you of his own lack of care for himself.
Well, yeah, but it's also his poverty. He came out of, he was really poor. I mean, he's a sailor, but he's also really poor. And so I think you see, even though he's slouched in a chair and he's in some ornate, but he doesn't have any, he's not taking care of himself. And I think it's also, that's how he started though. It's not, you can't fix yourself once you're successful. It's not that quick in that time period, even if it was post World War II. But it does seem that the director wants you to see that he came from the Mezzogiorno, that he was from Napoli, he was from the south of Italy, he wasn't somebody who had anything, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about your own life as an artist and what you were saying about, the writer, are they ultimately alone? And did you see any of your own journey mapped in Martin's?
I said that to Matthew the other day. I said to him, well, no, I think I have felt a kinship with, because you really do work alone. And I think that seems to me very much that's what he does. He works alone and then he never makes it. And when he finally does make it, you're glad for him, but then you see he's still alone.
Yeah.
Maybe a writer is always alone. And even though surrounded by publicity and fame and fortune, if that happens. But, I'm always brought in by quotes, like what's madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance. But I think that's the kind of quote that does fit for Martin Eden, because he's not just self-destructive. He doesn't have anyone. He's more alone at the end than he's ever been. When you meet him, he's alone, but he's really alone at the end. And I think that's important.
Yeah. And how does that tie in with all the, the political themes in the film, like between socialism and the individual? Do you see that like mirrored at all in his journey?
Yeah, don't you see that he gives the payoff to the socialists, but he doesn't do it openly. They keep saying, don't give your money away, but he's doing it, even though they don't agree, he's giving them money.
Yeah.
But that's what I said to you and Matthew when we began, though. I thought that was a good line about you are all socialists anyway. I don't know. I just don't think anybody sees him, no, except for Russ. I don't think anyone's really made a connection with him, including either one of the women. I mean, in a sense that are interested and like him and everything and care for him, but he isn't able to hold on to them. So Russ is somebody, when Russ goes, I think you really see the change.
And that brings up a lot of questions too, of like the idea of like a mentor or trying to have like an apprenticeship in the field, because it's like every other career that's available, it seemed like there was a door for him, like, oh, go work at my father knows somebody, he can get you a job there. So how writing kind of resists becoming an industry in that way. Like it felt more like he had a philosophical apprenticeship almost with Russ there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's very much the case in the book, in the novel, that Russ and he have a bond. I don't really care what about the bond, literary critics say about the bond, that was a good or not, and who Russ was modeled after, because I don't think it matters. I think in the film you see that actor as somebody who's made a connection to the writer, and the actor in the film has made a connection to the other actor, and the connection he needs. He's mentoring him in a way that no one ever has. Mm-hmm. He brings him to the socialist meeting saying you should speak. That's good, I think. Even though he is not, they don't like him, but it gives him an opportunity. And that's also the book that sells, is that political book. It's not his own fiction. It's not his poetry either.
Yeah, it brings up so many questions. I'm worried about time a little bit, so I want to just send some questions from our audience before, I go back to asking my own questions. But we do have one asking why we think an Italian filmmaker chose to make this film.
Well, I think he answers that. We were talking about, there's a very good interview with the director, not on the site right now, but it was done in Toronto. But he explains that in Italy, there's a tradition of writers and filmmakers too, who dealt with certainly the post-World War II in the neorealism, but dealt with the poor and the people in Mezzogiorno. So I think he mentions that in Italian, but I think it's all, that seems to be the heart of the story is, for me it was anyway. I mean, I think the heart of the story was the woman and the kids on the train who take him home. Mm-hmm. That's an essential gesture too. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that answers your question, but I'm not sure it does.
I think so. I mean, I think I'm thinking of that too, right at the end where she tries to intervene and says, come back and stay with us. But it feels like it's impossible at that point for him to be, at least for him to see that he could be restored in some way.
Well, that's the only home he's ever had.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense of home, because he's been adrift, he's on the sea, he's been the sailor, and then somebody's offering him that. I know he can't take it. I agree with you. He can't take it. That's exactly what he needs, is somebody to say, here's a place you belong, and that you have a place to belong to. That seems the writer, that's part of your writer issue too. Yeah. The more maybe success does make you more and more alienated. I don't know. It certainly has happened to a lot of other writers as well.
Yeah. Like you were saying too, it's really just a sailor story at the same time. Like for people in the audience who've seen the film, there's so much with the water and especially the ending scene. Like I know you're mentioning too, the character in the book has like how he's described, you were mentioning, it remind you of just like, even when he's in the back on land, he still kind of has the unsteadiness of the sea.
Did you feel that, I don't know if you did or not, in the opening scene when he goes to her house? See, it happens so abruptly that is not what happens. The brother brings him home because he's rescued him from some thugs. Mm-hmm. So that quite abruptly, but when he comes to the house, he feels like he's going to break something. I was trying to explain that to my wife, Michelle, saying, that sailors have grown to walk on board a ship a certain way, and there's no grace in him in the novel in the beginning, and he lacks that, and he feels really awkward in the presence of these, people, and he makes it known, and then she gives him a grammar book, and so he goes back and studies that, and that's what he starts doing.
I thought a little like the scene with the bread and the sauce, or he tries to turn that into something graceful, where he's like, "Oh, I just wanted to eat this," but he still has that it does, that mannerism made me think a lot of how he must act on the boat.
In our family, we call them scarpetti, but that's exactly what the Italians would call it. Is they always use your bread to little shoes, what's left in the plate. And so that is a link, and some people would look in their circle would look down on it, but nobody who's been to Rome would look down on it or anything. Sorry.
Yeah. So were there other moments like that where you felt like there was something that was distinctly Italian about this, that the director made the case of why it needed to be in Italy?
Yeah, I think the thing that it was in Italy is he really felt that that's just a tradition there. I think I don't know what I was again talking to Matthew. Can't talk in a vacuum, but I think of Christ Stopped at Eboli because that was based on a novel, kind of what we call now auto fiction, but the writer became so in love that, and both in the film and in the novel or the auto fiction, and so in love with the people that he met in the Mezzogiorno when he was sent there because of criticized Mussolini, that he's buried there in that town, which is no longer, there is no province any longer. It's now been included into Calabria, but the town is so poor, and he identifies with them. So I think the director definitely identified Martin Eden as somebody who really felt connected to the poor in a way that he liked. That's what I interpreted his discussion that I heard. It was in Italian and it was translated. But I listened to the Italian and I kept hearing him talk about Salome, who you must read, Bread and Wine. If you haven't read Bread and Wine, or also at least Montemara, where the rich control the water. Doesn't sound too familiar, does it? And so the director knows this, and I think that's his tradition. I thought it was very much in that tradition. So that's what I said to Matthew earlier. I was trying to say that seems to be natural. A natural follow-up would be Christ Stopped at Eboli, which is quite long, but it's an incredible story. And then at the end, they tell you that Carlo Levi, because he was so enamored of that place, that he wanted to be buried there. After all the other books and everything else he did, he went back to Rome, but he wanted to be buried in that small town in the south. So that seems like the director's, his real, the Italians, the Germans, the French, all loved Jack London. As I said to you earlier, he, up until maybe 20 years ago, he was one of the best-selling authors in the whole world, all over the world, for whatever reason. Maybe it was because of his Yukon stories, but I think there was a lot of other stories too, though. Certainly the ones I read beyond the Yukon ones were the Sea Wolf and Iron Heel and those kind of things too. They weren't just the Call of the Wild. But I think that was made him popular. Or my favorite, as I said to Matthew, was a very short story, or long short story called To Build a Fire, which is really about the environment. Mm-hmm. And how man stumbles into the environment with blinders on. And that was written, probably first for Boy's Life, where the main character doesn't die. And then later, again, he wrote a second version of it where the main character does die. But it was written at a time of the gold rush and what that was doing to the great Yukon wilderness. Wow. So that's pretty ahead of its time as well.
Yeah, that sounds like the next one to be.
Well, they made it into a very short film, but it kind of doesn't work because nothing happens. There's it's like Camus. They're just walking into the wilderness and nothing happens. He just dies. But as I said to you earlier, in his death, he at least acknowledges the fact that he should have paid attention to his senses and listened to the old timer who tells him, don't go to the Yukon, don't walk out into the Yukon alone. And that's what I'm saying about Russ in the film. I think the filmmaker does a good job of saying Russ is the old guy who brings this young guy in and says, go speak, find your voice, or find a connection. I think Russ sees what's happened to Russ, who's got consumption, TV, and knows he's dying, and he's wealthy too. He's got what the hero doesn't have, what Martin Eden doesn't have at the time. I don't know. We've gone on too long, right?
No, I think you're making a good connection there, like about. I think that would be the hope of the film, is the idea of that there could be a continuity of knowledge in some way, whether it's through the books that get left behind, or if it's through a mentor figure. But again, it's like I'm thinking of how that again would leave out the poorer people without access to that knowledge, because I think that's so much in the film is like who gets access to knowledge and how and why, and like Martin gets to have sort of self-made man journey in a way that so many of the other characters who are in poverty don't get. I don't really know if there's a question in there. I was just observing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, the other thing I like about him as a character, both in the film and in the novel, though, he's somebody that there's something in him that I want to say compassion, but that's not the right word. But when they first meet, he first meets Elena in the film and Ruth in the novel. She sees something in him beyond his intelligence that surprises her. She sees in him something that she is, I guess, attracted to, but she also sees that he's really intelligent, despite his awkwardness, his inability to walk through the room. And he is that guy, though. He was very well cast. The actor is very well, because he is that. He's been a fist fighter and a street fighter. So the scene that you see is right out of the novel. That fighting scene at the end, because that's what he used to do. I mean, he fought everywhere. And so you see him in that opening scene, and he's that guy, but she sees in him something much deeper, much more important. And that seems to me the movie is finds, he does find his voice, but he can't do it alone. He needs people. I think that seems his echo in the film too.
Yeah. We have another question coming in. So one of the viewers is saying that the film also reminds them of the Elena Ferrante novels set in Naples. Can you comment on that?
Well, certainly if I've seen the whole series, I've read only one of the novels. I mean, I've read two of the novels. I'm sorry, I read one in the North, but I think there's a definite grounding there in that same thing, especially in the beginning. If you saw the series in the films in the beginning and the novel too, that when they're young, especially like the whole first. I've just read the first novel there, and also another one about a character in the North. But I think the setting, you can't escape the setting, especially that time period. That's what we were saying. That was an incredible part of World War II there too. I mean, I don't think people are aware of that. We always think of Normandy, but as I was saying to you earlier, the worst amphibious landing in Europe was at Anzio, and it lasted for 3 months, and it was just horrible. And so everybody was involved in it. Like in terms of Americans and British never got off the beach. There was no getting off the beach until eventually the Germans pulled back. But the communities around there were all touched by that. And the cemetery, as I said to you, at Nettuno is huge.
Mm-hmm.
George Bush II visited there right before one of his terms because so many Italian Americans are buried there who fought in that campaign to retake Italy. So I think that's part of the Elena, the setting in that. If the first 3 or 4, if you watch the HBO series or whatever network it was on, really felt like the post-World War II, same kind of poverty and the, I don't know if you've seen Paisan by Rossellini. It's 6 vignettes. And 2 of them are set maybe 3 are set in Napoli or in the Mezzogiorno or in the South. So I like the Elena character, and the people were all like really part of it had to be set in Naples. I mean, that was definitely the feeling of the books and also of the film. I think in the beginning, there was really a great texture. That seemed like he knew that too. I mean, the director was probably pretty aware of that. In terms of the upper class and that whole kind of, or middle class, whatever you want to call them, but it does seem like upper class when you're really poor.
Yeah.
Not sure to answer that question.
No, I think it makes a lot of the connections there. I don't know if anybody else has questions. I know we've had new people come in since we started, so you can either put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute, we're a small enough group here that just feel free to unmute and jump in, or I'm happy to read them from the chat as well.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the poor as well. That's why my third adventure at the American Academy really was really the most serious one I've had, because I was very interested in home and what do you do without a home? And I think that's what happens to this character in Martin Eden, especially in the Italian version, is there's no home. He has no place to go. So, except back to sea.
I think we have a question coming in.
Okay, here's a question. Towards the end of the movie, when that guy comes walking down the beach telling everybody the war has started, do you know what the significance of that is, or which war he was talking about? Or is it just class war or any war? Or?
No, I think that's Juliana and I spoke earlier today, but I think that could be, the World War II has ended, because you see the destroyer, or at least a small destroyer there on the side has to be somebody's, probably an American boat, for what it looked like. It wasn't positive, but it doesn't matter. I think the migrants on the beach are also not named. So it could be Syrian migrants. It could be African migrants. It doesn't, they're dark. You can't really see them. I guess you could get a close-up if I went back and looked, but in the film, they're not meant to be. And that guy coming by could be anywhere. There's been an endless war since World War II, depending on how you look at it, at least from the Italian point of view, for quite some time. Now it's become a human war. So I think that's where he pulls us in. To me, I like the ending better because he pulls us into that. He says, this is still going on. It's still going on. And I think the Italians were, I think they were very early on helping some of the migrants from Armenia, excuse me, not Armenia, Armenia, some of the Armenians, and also, I'm sorry, but they were helping people very early on. Another film called L'America, where they are helping refugees in certain parts of Calabria in the south. They brought refugees in a long time ago. So that seems to me part of that too. I don't know.
And I remember we also spoke a little bit about, it feels like there's a parallel between like the veteran experience and even the life of the writer, but in particular Martin's life of isolation, and like you were saying, that the lost idea of home, or feeling like you have this knowledge of the world that not everybody does, and it's like a horrific knowledge in certain ways. So I'm curious, because I know you write and have had that you're a veteran and have experience in that area. I'm wondering if you could talk about that. Yeah.
Well, I think the kinship I felt only with London is saying, imagine seeing the world at 16. I mean, I don't know what we think. We wouldn't let our sons go out at 16, probably. And here's somebody who's gone all over the world as a sailor at 16, and what is that person seen, and what an incredible knowledge. Like Melville and other writers, but at the time get to go all over the place, and it just gives you a different perspective on the world. So that's what I'm saying about the war stuff at the end. I think that war could be any war. I don't know. Mm-hmm. There's so much savagery that's close by that he see. You get it through. I think you get it through his perspective. I could be wrong. I'm not. I've only seen it once. I suppose I have to go back and look one more time, but it's certainly towards the end, there's a lot of things that come together at the end of that movie, in my opinion, that have to do with the isolation and alienation. I mean, I don't know, that seems to be an important theme.
Yeah.
Alienation and exile and loneliness, I was fascinated with that only because of the Pasolini films like, The Scrounger, translated for you, but some of the Pasolini films, and certainly all the novels of Silone. I don't think they've been, I'm not sure, they may have been made into films, but I haven't seen them. But I think a lot of the Pasolini, he really deals with the poor, and, even if maybe you've seen Mama Roma, which is also that. I was very interested in that. So, how do you hold on to a home? Or what is your home? Where is your place? That's why when she says, stay here with us, it's very important. You're right, very important. To me, very important to have some kind of a place to call home. Even if it's a little apartment with a stove, which is in the novel, is he finally moves out of his sister's apartment into a place of his own. It's very narrow and very small, but it's his own. And so he writes from that place. And that's where he stays until he meets the character in the film, but in the novel, she's Portuguese, and she takes care of him. So in the film, it's the same thing. So they bring him home. I mean, there's a place there that he can stay. They give him a room, he fixes it up, and he stays. I don't know.
I think, yeah, it's a great connection. I think we have another. I'm wondering which order to do these questions in. I might start with one that feels a little closer to what we're just talking about. Is there a meaning that you see in that image of the sinking sailboat, the large sinking sailboat? Because we've been talking a lot about the sea going away. Do you see meaning in that?
Well, it's there very deliberately. No, it's very deliberate, and it seems to me that he is losing touch because who does he have? I mean, there's nobody that he has. That seems very important to what we're talking about. That, however you want to bring that into the discussion, but that you keep seeing that the ship is afloat, but it's going down, it's going down, it's going down. And I think that's the filmmaker trying to give you a sense of like what he's feeling about with the vacuousness of what he's finally got, and he sees his life as being empty. Why is it empty? I think that's very at the heart of the what London's doing in the novel too. I think that's what I'm saying about the filmmaker. The more I think about the film, the better the book becomes. But I think it's worth thinking about the book when a filmmaker deliberately says, "I made this because we all loved reading Jack London growing up." So we got to go back and read Jack London, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I have it right that this was the filmmaker's first narrative film, like that all of the others were documentary before this. I could be wrong, but it's an interesting, that he would do this as his first narrative.
There was just one that he did that was kind of a
Okay.
construction, but I think you're right. I did a lot of documentaries. But I think I probably waited to do this. I don't know. I think he waited till, I think he said something about I had to do
like 20 years, I think, like a long
Yes.
time.
Well, he's only 46, but he said it was a long time. I think he said that in the interview, the second interview, right? I mean, he said how long he waited to make the movie. But
another connection to be made. We have a question coming in. I don't know if you've seen A Star Is Born, that film. And so the question is, there's a similarity between the suicide in that film and the suicide in this film. Do we see comments, especially, the ideas of like fame and success?
yeah, I did see the film, and I don't know, kind of success, I think, but there's kind of a deliberate alienation there. But I just think this one has much more. The way it was done was better. It's better. I think it was, as Matthew said earlier, I think there was an abruptness to the change. But I felt after I went away from that for a day or two, I thought, now that's really earned. That makes it a contemporary film instead of, a Jack London film, film about Jack London's novel. It brings us into a contemporary sensibility. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know about A Star Is Born. I mean, I guess you could go to a lot of films. I didn't think of that originally. I think Michelle, my wife, thought of The Awakening and also of Virginia Woolf, The Waves, but I thought of The Awakening as well. And I also thought about, that seems to be a thing that's happened. The notion of suicide for us is really repulsive, I think, but I think it's not the same for Europeans. I don't think they see that. They don't see it as an act of cowardice or mental illness alone. I think that I think he has no place else to go.
And I think there is a difference too, like in A Star Is Born, the way the story is told, at least, it's more like you're saying, a function of the addiction and the mental health. Like that's the framework the movie sets up. And this one, it, like you're saying, it has a larger like political kind of statement attached in a way.
Yeah. Well, his criticism of the people who are reading him and his criticism of the vacuousness of the people who are reading him, but I still think he has no, like the character in that Star Is Born, he has no place to go. I mean, he thinks he has a place to go, but is he? I think you should use I love George Lucas, so I'm going to keep quoting you that, because when I found that, it was through Cesare Pavese, it was not just through Lucas. But I was taken with the idea that the contemporary hero becomes more so that over the modern hero, who doesn't, who changes and alters or gets married or doesn't get married or runs away. But the modern hero becomes more like he or she was beforehand and goes to whatever it is. And so I was always fascinated, though, as I said to you, with some sense, what keeps you whole and belonging is someplace to be, someplace that you have that, wherever it might be. I think that's what you were talking about, like, where am I going to make my next place? But I think that seems to me very important. I don't know.
Yeah.
I do say I have a bias on that.
But I think it's an interesting, it's interesting to talk about it in that way versus what we usually see with suicide in American made.
Well, I don't think home has to be a physical place either. It could be a state of mind, but where you feel at home. It doesn't have to be a place. Is it a state of a mind or a state of being? And I think his inability to find anything, like no restlessness, no home, can't go back to in the novel. In either way, you can't go back. So you're trapped, I suppose.
Okay, we have another question, but this time wanting to talk more about Martin's anti-socialism versus his connection with Russ. So talking more directly about what his political positions are and why. Yeah.
Right. Well, right before I think the quote I liked, if I can just do one quote.
Yeah, sure.
It goes right to what you and I were talking about earlier. You do corporation work. Quote, you have no working class nor criminal practice. You don't depend on wife beaters and pickpockets for your income. You get your livelihood from the masters of society, and whoever feeds a man is that man's master. Yes, you are a henchman. You are interested in advancing the interests of the aggregations of capital you serve. You're the socialist. You know, he's claiming that the lawyer is a socialist because he's using the system to his advantage, just like what they're accusing the socialists. And he in London said this, and I think Matthew did a good job of saying that too, but he wrote to, you know, saying, hey, I'm not a socialist, I'm an individualist. I don't care what London said about it, but I think you have to be drawn to that. So I think that's a definite slam to the people at that dinner party and the lawyers about how they're making their money. And that's the beginning. I think that is Russ's influence, but it's also his ability. He needed somebody to help him through this. And I think Russ's suicide was bad. It was a bad sign because he needed some friend or somebody to lean on or whatever you want to call it. So I think that's an answer. Doesn't answer that question, but I don't see the film.
I just wanted to agree for a second that scene, that dinner table scene, was sort of the key to the whole movie, and those two views and his view, his statement to that effect is central to it, and it is what makes it such, I think, so important to today and today's audience, and why that filmmaker wanted to make that movie. I mean, he set up that dinner for this very purpose, and that's what interests him. This conflict between, you know, the socialist and the individualist, and you know what those terms really mean. But I think that is why this filmmaker, or why any filmmaker would be attracted to this story that's, you know, so many decades old, is that this actually is a very contemporary problem that plenty of people go through, that this is seen as how to be successful, that you know, cut yourself off loose from your family or your community or your networks of support, and you know, strive to this, you know, conception of greatness that takes you apart and above, where yes, you still can and do, you know, maybe give away your money and contribute to people that you've known in your past, but at the same time, it separates you from them, and it separates you from everyone, and you are become alienated, and you do it, you know, and it, many people seem to end up this way, and at the same time, it destroys our culture, because that's, you no longer are satisfied with being a part of an organic network. You want to climb above it to be one of the, you know, masters of the universe, and those avenues are open. That is a way, that is held up to be a route in our culture and through our educational system, and it's an avenue to wealth, and a lot of people do that, and it's part of the tension that we're all living with. It's a really interesting book to examine this question and make into a movie.
That's for sure.
But I would personally say that socialism does not have to deny individuality. Individualism and individuality are two different things, and it would be nice if we would learn to explore our individuality without being destructive.
Yeah, it's
Good point.
yeah, and I think it's hard, like we're saying, to put it in the context of the life of the artist too, and how, I don't know, it feels like he had to mature too in what he thought the role of the artist was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think we see that though, do we? I mean, I think we see only his success quickly. You know, I think you see him when he's in the apartment with the family and a check comes in the mail. And he goes out and buys food, but you don't see that it's that. I think in the reality, it doesn't happen that way. It happens slowly, little by little. And then and as it does happen, then it does happen all at once. So I think the filmmaker condensed maybe 150 pages, but that's important too. I think to say, well, what do you make it? But what do you make? I mean, what have you got? I think you were right about talking about community or others or something. You need somebody. He seems to me, I'm sorry. I'm very interested in this because of what happens to him. He seems to become more and more alone. And that's, I think what Matthew said, the break or whatever you want to call it, but there's kind of a break in there when you suddenly see him in the chair. He just seems a completely different person. He isn't. He's just got a, new hairdo.
But I like what Matthew was saying about, how that is a myth that's still not even a myth. It's a prescription that's given still of like, you need to go off and like that success is only valued or respected if it's earned on your own in a lot of parts of our culture. But it's also not possible because even, I don't know, like even when Martin thinks he's being an individual, he's still being taken care of. Like he could not have written that story that got him money if the family hadn't taken him in.
Right.
He probably would have died.
What did you think about the scene when Elena comes to visit him? Her mother's driven her up in a car. He knows somebody's driven her there. But what do you think about that scene in terms of his relationship with her? Because that's a very important scene, I think, too. Yeah. You kind of look down and see her and getting into the car afterwards. What did you think about that?
Well, I think it's interesting to show her because you see the destruction of her soul too, in a way where I do believe at the beginning she genuinely loved him, and like she also is hurt by this system, which is what we see now too. Like even the isolation of the super wealthy, and so for her, I felt I felt how he felt towards her. Like I know you don't love me enough to like disobey your family, but I also see her struggle of being a woman in that time and the choices she had. I don't know, but I do think she lost something too because of the system.
I think you're right, and I think the novel really, instead of the Volvo driving away with her mom, the brother has brought her to the apartment where he's living, and he knows somebody's brought her there but the family now wants her to connect with him. Now he's a good suitor. So that really gets him more, he can't even offer her. He does genuinely love her in the beginning too. And I think she does. I think you're right. But the family now condones the relationship with Martin when before they were against it. That's how he meets Russ, is they're having the party so that she'll be distracted people instead of just this one sailor.
Yeah. Well, on that note, are there any other, we're just coming close on time, so I want to make sure I leave room if there's any final questions from the audience, or if anybody else wants to speak, even if you just had an opinion you wanted to share, you're welcome to. I'll see if anybody, yeah. All right. Matthew, do you have any final?
Roger had his hand up.
Roger, go ahead. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. That scene you were just talking about, I remember when I saw it, I thought, gee, this is strange because it's been a few years since maybe several years since she had last seen him. And now she suddenly decides to overcome whatever was holding her back to reconnect. Somehow I think that he seems to feel it is insincere to some extent. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
Well, Juliana, you want me to answer that, or should I? Well, I think, let me say this: in the novel, the parents have put her up to that. she is reluctant to go. But I think in the film, it's the same feeling. It's still there, that they are saying he's made it, so he's acceptable. And I think that's something that is revolting. It repulses him in a way. And he can't even do what Matthew was saying. He can't do what he would be doing before. He can't even embrace her in a way that she really wants to be embraced at all, because he sees that somebody's put her up to it. That the job that she wanted him to do that he wouldn't do, become a clerk in a law office or whatever it is her father's offering, in a sense, but get involved. I don't know. That's my feeling about it. I think you're right about it. He sees that she's insincere, maybe, but he can't even give her. He really did love her, though. I think he was genuinely in love with Elena, not her lifestyle alone, but with her, the person. He sees that in the beginning. It's like the, moonstruck or whatever you want to say. But that really happened in the beginning, I think. And that is the true, that's the heart of the story too, is that he really cared for her. And I think he's turned around by that. I don't know what she could have done, but I see that's another bad thing that happens, is when she leaves, he's even more alone now, and how can she break through to that? They show you in the film the relationship with the other woman, whose name I'm not going to remember, but because it's confusing in the novel, but he doesn't have a relationship with either one. That's what I'm saying. I was saying to Juliana earlier about, don't we need somebody in a very important way to connect with us? I think that's been a sustaining thing for all kinds of people, that you need someone to talk to, or confide in and really trust. And I think he's lost trust. You're right. I think he's lost his trust in her. He knows she's maybe not there by herself alone. And as I said in the novel, the brother's waiting around the corner. In the movie, the mother's outside in Navarro, taking her daughter there. So the mother's condoning the visit.
Now back to the other question I'd asked earlier about A Star is Born in Norman, Maine. And Norman Maine goes and he just completely destroys himself, with drink and so on, in his relationship with the star, and then he goes and walks into the water, off into the sunset, just like in this film. It was almost like they were almost identical shots. I wonder if one influenced the other, if one author influenced the other. And when did let's see, when did London write this?
This was written in 1909. So it was kind of, I think he was 30 some years old. I mean, I'm not a London scholar. I just happen to be an aficionado of London. But my old chair, where I first taught many years ago, was a London PhD.
That's interesting that the story brought up to like in 1950 or 60 or something like that, when it was, and after, when it was written, World War I and World War II hadn't happened yet. So it's interesting that transition was made in turning it into a film.
Yeah,
I think that's why I really liked that what that director was doing with this. I don't know a whole lot about A Star is Born, but I think it was written very early. You're right. He wrote a lot of other books after that.
Yeah.
I just thought the only small research I did on the book was besides reading it again, was to see what the biographer said about, and I thought it was very interesting, as we mentioned earlier, how long it was in print, in hardcover. Why, as you said now, why are they making this movie in 2019 and people are getting to see it in 2020? I think that's to the heart of the story there. I really do.
Yeah.
Especially now, we're all less together than we've ever been. I don't know. There's no way for us to get together. So,
well, we have our Zoom at least, but it definitely feels relevant. I just want to say we just have like 5 minutes left. So I want to get us to wrap up. I want to just touch on the final question that we have, and this one is about do you think that there is an anti-intellectual message at all in the film? Since the unschooled but smart happy man becomes unhappy and angry and depressed as soon as he becomes educated and successful. And I'd even be interested too, Matthew, if you want to say anything with what you're saying before about, you know, to go off and, you know, become your great self message, if either one of you wanted to speak to that. Yeah.
I don't know, Matthew?
Not right now.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I was just curious.
You know, there's plenty of evidence that says that that is not the case. There's plenty of writers like Pablo Neruda who did not grow isolated and alone through his work and his writing, even though he was a great success. I mean, I know there are writers who've done that, but I think if we stay that, I think it's something bigger than that this film was attempting to do, to say something about the individual and society and about socialism and the community. I think it's much bigger than, you know, is it anti-intellectual? No, I don't think it is. I think it's saying some of the people who read his books are not reading it. Maybe we buy books and we don't read them. Maybe we buy them because somebody says they're good and we'll read them because everybody's saying, hey, this is a great book. But I think it's wrong to get lost in that. I think it's wrong to get lost in the anti-intellectualism when it's really much more about what the Italians care about, which is a sense of being with others, a sense of community, a sense of things that are getting us in trouble right now because we all want to be with other people, not just our own family, but with other people, and we can't do that.
And this sort of fear of socialism as something which has earned a deservable reputation of people being cogs in a machine, right, and, you know, losing their individuality and their spirit, and, you know, that are being stifled by a community that has, you know, that keeps people down or has, you know, high, you know, moral expectations and dubious definitions of what those morals are. There are reasons that people reject those ideas. And this book, you know, yeah, it's a very complicated book. He's saying a lot of different things, and it's not, you know, necessarily. I think he's opening up a lot of questions through this character.
Yeah, I would agree.
Doesn't it seem a lot different than Jack London's other books, especially, you know, his adventures in the North and then across the ocean?
Well, as I said to you earlier, People of the Abyss, which is like Orwell's Life, you know, we were talking the other day, but Life in the, you know, when he did a whole piece on the coal miners in England too. So there's a connection between like an Orwell and a Jack London in that respect. But he had a lot, the sea books are great, and the ones about Yukon are incredible. And there's a book that is published that's really like Joseph Conrad too, but he had a lot. He just worked a lot hard. He worked hard. He wrote 50 novels and died very young. But the first one I read was John Barleycorn, which was about alcoholism. John Barleycorn Must Die, because he also was an alcoholic. It really brought him, you know, as well as many other things that he was. But I'm just saying, I don't know. I think he was one of those writers that just had to, he just was burning up. And he really had to keep doing what he was doing. So, but what's one thing we all have to say to the director, and I think the director and I would agree on that one, is this was the most autobiographical of any of his books. You know, I know the stories are, he was in the Yukon and he did this and all that stuff, but I think this one, you really get an insight into something about London himself, the person. Now we would call it autofiction, I guess. New term, but according to my friend, but I don't know. I mean, I think you think about writers who deliberately, I was talking to someone the other day, and maybe it was Matthew, I'm not sure, about Rebecca Harding Davis doing Life in the Iron Mills, and there's a guy in that film, in that book. I don't know if there's been a film made of it, in her novel, very early, and she depicts what happens to a guy who picks up a wallet on the floor of the factory and takes the wallet. He hasn't stolen it, but he picks it up, and because it was one of the owners who came through and dropped his wallet, they put him in jail, and he kills himself in his cell. But he's an artist. He's been making out of the iron ore in the iron mill art. And so it's a very interesting early novel written right before the Civil War, 1863, about the same kind of situation where in a different way, but about the poor. So I don't know. I was attracted to that story and stories like that because they talk about isolation, loneliness, alienation, the artist trying to make art. It's impossible for him. The directors of the factory come in and see this stuff he's making out of the throwaway from the iron mills, and he's making something out of that they're throwing away. So there's something they like about that, but at the same time, they're seeing it's crude and really not something that would be in a museum when it actually is quite lovely. And you begin to see the figure of who the man really is, who's been doing all this work all day long. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. You're right. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. I've always been in love, as Matthew knows, with Italian film, and it just happened.
Did he spend a lot of time in Italy?
I did, yeah. I spent a lot of time. I was there. I was in Sicily right before the pandemic. We spent.
Did Jack London spend a lot of time in Italy?
London? I don't think London ever went to Italy. I have no idea. He may have. I'm not positive. I have not read a complete biography of London, but I can tell you that I'm not going to read the one from 19. I think there's a newer one now, but I do have all of his books that were donated to us. So I will have to read a biography of him, but I don't have a good biography right now. But I don't know where he traveled. I do know that he was very much taken with the South Deep Sea Islands. Mm-hmm. It becomes a theme in the novel, not in the film, but the sea, going back to the sea again. You think in the novel that he's going to maybe try to get back to the South Sea Islands that he cares about, because he bought all this stuff to go back there. But on board, he starts reading and thinking and alone, and he gets off the ship into the ocean. So it's a different ending than the film, but it's the same kind of story. But I couldn't tell you. I don't know if he traveled in Italy or not.
Well, thank you. We're over time, so I just want to jump in. But I think this was a really wonderful conversation, and I've learned so much about Jack London and about, just sort of the contextualizing the history of this. So thank you so much. And I hope everybody else enjoyed the conversation. Just before we go, I want to make a quick plug that, Rivertown Film is a nonprofit, and today is Giving Tuesday. For those who don't know, it's, I guess I will call it a national holiday, even though it's not officially a national holiday, but, it's a day that encourages you to find nonprofits that you want to support and to make a donation to them, especially after we just have Black Friday and people are getting ready for holidays. There's other ways you can support. You can gift memberships from Rivertown as well as making just a regular donation. So if you do want to continue supporting our programming, you can go to rivertownfilm.org, and there's a donate button there that leads to the PayPal. But other than that, like I mentioned before, this is our last film screening, but we are going to be replaying our short film program towards the end of the month that has connects to what we were just talking about, the idea of community. We made the short film series to bring local filmmakers or people who have roots in Rockland County together. So there's 20 short films, all from people affiliated with Rockland or who currently live here. So just keep an eye out for that. If you didn't get to see it earlier in the year, we'll be playing it again. So that's all that I have. I don't know, Matthew, if you had any other announcements you wanted to make.
I got one thing. If you're hooked on London, you could probably see that short story, To Build a Fire, online, because it's only a 20-minute story. It's worth seeing because it's narrated in the beginning by Orson Welles.
Oh, cool.
And
I'm
if
interested now, you can go back and look.
I have it on video because I found it somewhere on video. I mean, on DVD many years ago. But it doesn't quite work unless you've read the story, but at least you get the overview in the beginning of man walking into this incredible wilderness with blinders on. And I think we've done it. So he was way ahead. He was also very much involved in animal, wildlife, and also the natural world too. So an early environmentalist. But it's worth seeing. It's probably about 30 minutes long. It stars some actor that you've seen. I don't know his name. I should know. He's very popular. But he's not in a sense of like blockbuster films, but you'll know the actor, I think, who plays the newcomer who's never named.
Oh,
In the film, he's probably
will-
named. He names the dog, but he's in the story. He's never named. He's just a newcomer.
I will butt in to say that Rivertown may present another film before the end of the year. Who
Oh.
knows? There's possibilities.
Really?
We don't know.
sorry to jump the gun. Yeah.
It's not a problem. Who knows? Anyway, this has been truly a fascinating discussion. Really very interesting. The best. Thanks, Gerald.
Hey, thanks
you,
for having me.
Juliana.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.